Excuse me, can somebody please tell me why we gotta celebrate Black History Month? I wanna know why they gave us just a month, the shortest month.
I am here to represent the struggle that has gone on for 300 or more years.
We're not Americans. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America.
And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed and the ghetto without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
It's a common misconception that Europeans gave us Black History Month. In actuality, it spawned from Dr. Carter G Woodson. He was a visionary who believed history should be used as a source of motivation and a weapon against misinformation and the intellectual warfare against Black people in the diaspora. So he began developing the concept of Black History Week. Yes, that's where it started. And this concept came to life in February of 1926 and later turned into Black History Month. He chose the month of February because this is the month Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln was born. He acknowledged Lincoln for signing the Emancipation Proclamation, and naturally he believed Frederick Douglass was an example of determination for all Black people. Woodson was a dedicated scholar, a passionate writer whose pen stayed in constant motion, who was constantly teaching and documenting, all for the advancement of Black people. Dr. Woodson was the founder and publisher of the Journal of Negro History. He was a regular columnist for Marcus Garvey's weekly journal, Negro World. In 1915, he founded the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. In 1920, he founded the oldest operating African American book publishing company, Associated Publishers, and he wrote over 20 books. And his most famous work was The Miseducation of the Negro, which was written in 1933. Many Black scholars find this prolific book even more relevant in today's day and time. But just as important as who fought for Black history is why.
First, you have to realize that up until 1959, Africa was dominated by the colonial powers, and by the colonial powers of Europe having complete control over Africa, they projected the image of Africa negatively. They projected Africa always in a negative light. Jungles, savages, cannibals, nothing civilized. And naturally it was so negative until it was negative to you and me. And you and I began to hate it. We didn't want anybody to tell us anything about Africa, and much less call us an African. And in hating Africa and hating the African, we ended up even hating ourselves without even realizing it. Because you can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree. You can't hate your origin and not end up hating yourself.
May I say something to you to give you a true knowledge of yourself and life, so that the same glory and success attained by other men who understand themselves may be yours? Man in the full knowledge of himself is a superb and supreme creature of creation. When man becomes possessor of the knowledge of himself, he becomes master of his environment, the captain of his own ship, the director of his own destiny, the accomplisher of his own ends.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Do you realize that one of the great aims of all those who would enslave or who are enslaving is to keep the truth away from them? This is a tactic, a well-known tactic. Keep the truth out. Don't let the people know.
Much like these other great leaders, Dr. Woodson, having obtained his PhD from Harvard and being a professor at Howard University, saw firsthand how African American contributions were constantly overlooked, ignored, and suppressed by the writers of the textbooks and the teachers. And with Woodson coming from the world of academia, he was also very critical of how the institution of higher learning dealt with Black people. He believed they were pushing out educated servants that were thoroughly indoctrinated, not people who would return to their community and knew how to create their own. But instead, producing individuals that would depend on the same people that subjugated them. Dr. Woodson spent his life motivating black people with their history. His last work was the Encyclopedia Africana. It would have been a 6-volume work, but on April 3rd, 1950, at the age of 74, Dr. Woodson was laid to rest before it could be finished. Black History Month was never intended for us to restrict the learning of our history to February only. It was simply a way to collectively wake up our consciousness from what we were not being taught. Dr. Woodson understood that we could not rely on any institution or any other race to teach us about us, which is why he devoted his life to writing our history for you. And for that reason, this great ancestor, we honor. Ashe? Ashe. The first person to comment below with the Carter G Woodson quote, "I will personally mail you my copy of The Miseducation of the Negro," signed by the great Griot.